So what do you think evangelism is? If we ask 20 Christians to give us a definition for the word evangelism, we'll probably end up with 20 different answers. Because so often we're basing our Christian definitions on personal hunches, or what we read in a book, or what we heard somebody speak about. According to two of the world's leading Bible scholars, Dr. John Stott and Dr. J.I. Packer, evangelism is simply the proclamation of the gospel. Now, the evangelist was a runner. He'll carry the good news of a military victory from the battlefield to the king. He'll kneel down, unroll a scroll, and announce the victory. The message on the scroll was called the evangel, and the act of announcing that military victory to the king is called evangelism. Therefore, the act of announcing the gospel to a non-Christian and ensuring that they understand it is called evangelism. The message on the scroll has a beginning and a middle and an end, and therefore evangelism is not a process, it's an event. It's like sowing seeds in the soil. You don't sow the seed halfway in and push it in a bit more a few days later. You either sow the seed or you don't. In the same way, you either share the gospel or you don't share the gospel. In the book of Ephesians, it teaches us that some people in the church have what is commonly understood as the gift of evangelism. It says in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, it was he who gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors and teachers to prepare God's people for works of service. So that tells me that the real role of an evangelist is not just to share the gospel, but it's also to prepare God's people for works of service. So how would they do that? Well, first of all, by teaching those in the church how to share the gospel. And secondly, they need to be regularly sharing the gospel on a one-to-one basis with strangers themselves. Because if an Ephesians 4 evangelist was not regularly proclaiming the gospel, then with what authority would he or she have to train others? Those with the gifts cannot ask those without the gifts to go to places where they haven't even gone to themselves.
Only God can give the gift of evangelism. But when someone with the gift trains others how to proclaim the gospel, they begin to function as an evangelist. By proclaiming the gospel, what do we mean? We mean speaking out the gospel message. It could be in a conversation one-to-one, from a pulpit, on a stage with a crowd listening, via radio or television, in a private place or a public place. On what authority other than Dr. John Stott and Dr. J.I. Packer do we base our definition of evangelism as the proclamation of the gospel? These are only two scholars out of hundreds of scholars. Who else believes this? Is there really widespread consensus in the scholarly world about this?
A large group of scholars, theologians, pastors and leaders met up at the Lausanne Conference in 1974, and one of the reasons why they met up was to define evangelism. And in defining evangelism, the conference delegates formulated a series of key statements. Statement number one was that to evangelize is to spread the good news. Now, the word spread is very significant because by using the word spread, they wanted to convey an important truth. And that is that they did not want to restrict evangelism to just the spoken word of the gospel. They also wanted to include giving out tracts and literature upon which the gospel was written. Statement two, they said that our Christian presence is indispensable to evangelism, and so is that kind of dialogue whose purpose is to listen sensitively in order to understand. And all that's trying to say to us is that our Christian works must back up our words. And secondly, that when we present the Christian message, we must do so in love and grace and tenderness. Statement number three, but evangelism itself is the proclamation of the historical biblical Christ as Saviour and Lord. And what that's telling us is that we are to share the gospel and not our own idea of the gospel. Secondly, we are to share the whole gospel and not just the bits that we like or the bits that we think non-Christians will like. Statement number four, Jesus still calls all those who will follow him to deny themselves, take up their cross and identify themselves with his new community, which is basically saying to us that we're not to hide or gloss over or minimize the cost of discipleship when it comes to evangelism. Statement number five, The results of evangelism includes obedience to Christ, incorporation into his church, and responsible service in the world. And what that's saying to us is that when we proclaim the gospel, we should explain to non-Christians that coming to Christ involves obeying him and rolling up our sleeves and serving his purposes in the world. And another conference called This We Believe Conference 2000, attended by 229 of the world's leading Bible scholars and leaders, including Jack Hayford, Billy Graham, Ravi Zacharias, Don Carson, R.C. Sproul, Bill Hybels, Dr. Joanne Packer. One of the aims of the conference was to determine what the Bible really teaches about evangelism and the gospel. At the conclusion of the conference, they came up with a statement entitled The Gospel of Jesus Christ, an Evangelical Celebration. Affirmation 18 reads as follows.
Statement 1. We affirm that Jesus Christ commands his followers to proclaim the gospel to all living persons, evangelizing everyone everywhere. This is saying to us that the responsibility and privilege of proclaiming the gospel belongs to all believers, irrespective of gifting, station, calling or personality type. Second, the gospel must be spoken if it is to be called evangelism. And finally, we are to go to the lost with the gospel and not wait for them to come to us.
Statement number 2, they spoke about discipling new believers in the fellowship of the church, and what that is saying to us is that discipleship is very important indeed. Statement number 3, a full and faithful witness to Christ includes the witness of personal testimony, godly living, acts of mercy and charity, without which the preaching of the gospel appears barren. So what is that saying to us? We're to walk the talk. Statement 4, we deny that the witness of personal testimony, godly living, acts of mercy and charity constitutes evangelism apart from the proclamation of the gospel. So to put it another way, you can only call these things evangelism if you've got to proclaim the gospel at some point. We can therefore say that all evangelism is witnessing, but not all of our witnessing is necessarily evangelism.
Notice that This We Believe Conference 2000 narrowed the definition of evangelism to include only verbal communication of the gospel message. What shall we conclude then? Is evangelism just speaking the gospel, or does it include spreading the gospel message through tracts and literature? We must surely conclude that evangelism includes spreading the gospel, but biblically and ideally, the gospel was first and foremost intended to be spoken. Surely our goal in our churches should focus on training everyone on how to verbalize the gospel. This is the ideal. As an easy, achievable entry point, all people can start evangelizing by developing the habit of spreading the gospel using tracts. This is still evangelism. Now that we know the correct biblical definitions of the words, evangelism is the act of announcing or spreading the gospel, and everyone is called to do this. The evangelist is the person with the gift of evangelism. The evangel is the gospel message we are all to announce or spread. And the evangelizer is anyone who announces or spreads the gospel message. Here's a 7-step plan to progress in evangelism. The first step is dropping tracts in a private place where no one can see you. Make sure you find good quality tracts that clearly communicate the gospel message. You can then leave them in places where no one will ever see you, like park benches, telephone boxes, post boxes, public toilets, ATM machines. Include them with bills that you pay for. I once left a tract on a passenger seat on the Central line on the London Underground. At the next stop, I watched a lady get on the train and pick up the tract. She proceeded to read it and then fold it up and place it in her handbag. I prayed that she would one day give her life to Christ. My office received a phone call 1 week later from a lady that had found a tract on an underground train and had given her life to Christ and now wanted some help in finding a church in London. Tracts really do work. The second step is dropping tracts in a public place where someone might see you. If you build up the courage, you can drop tracts where people may very well see you. You can leave them on seats and tables, on planes, trains, cars, buses, even restaurant tables, along with a kind tip. The third step is to give a tract to someone. If you gather enough boldness, you can offer a person a tract without having to even discuss what it is about. You could be paying for something at the cashier, and in a kind way you can say, "Have you had one of these?" Or, "This is for you, I hope you have a nice day." I have friends that frequently drive through toll booths and not only pay for their own car, but they also ask to pay for their friends in the car behind and ask, "Can you pass this tract to my friend when they drive through, please?" The fourth step is to do a survey approach in order to give a tract. Gather a group from your church and as a team, set to the streets in your local shopping centre or at a community event. Set out to ask people some basic survey questions, and at the end, your goal is to simply hand them a tract. The goal of this step is not to share the gospel yourself, but at this stage to build confidence in handing someone a gospel tract, to break the fear barrier of evangelism. At the Southend Air Show, we asked people the following 10 questions in our survey. Question number 1, "Excuse me, could you help me with a simple questionnaire?" Question 2, "What is your first name?" Question 3, "Are you having a good day?" Question 4, "Is this the first time at the air show?" Question 5, "What is the best part of the air show?" Question 6, "What would you like to see improved for next year's air show?" Question 7, "Is there anything the council could do to improve the air show?" Question 8, "Is there anything the community can do to improve the air show?" Question 9, "Is there anything the churches can do to improve the air show?" And finally, question 10, "Have you had one of these before?" At the end, we simply offer the person a tract and a free balloon or a bottle of water, and the job's done. The exercise helps to build your boldness in speaking to people with matters that connect to God. If this step is too scary to imagine, though, then start with the first step. The fifth step is to do a survey approach in order to share the gospel yourself. This step takes things to a whole new level, as the goal here is to share the gospel yourself instead of using a tract as in the previous step. This is where you will go through some survey questions, and at the end you'll ask the person if you can give them the best explanation of what a Christian is. And if the person is interested, then you'll share the gospel message yourself. The survey questions often open up friendly banter and conversation, and so by the time you're ready to share the gospel, you've already got on first name terms. You can share the gospel in a similar way as shown earlier in this teaching resource. The sixth step is to share the gospel one-to-one. There's a high skill factor in approaching a complete stranger and presenting the gospel in a relevant and caring way. Not everyone is called to use this method. However, if you are, then you stand a better chance of sharing the message of a complete stranger if you've actually learnt how to articulate the words of the gospel. I find the best way to share the gospel with a complete stranger, whether that's on the street or in a shop or in an aeroplane, is by starting a normal conversation based on the situation or circumstances that I find myself in. Using common courtesies and endearing questions like, "How are you today?" or "I've seen you before," if that's a relevant question to ask. "What is your name? Where are you going?" Showing interest in someone else in a casual way can open up great conversations that could lead to an opportunity for you to share the most amazing news of all. The seventh step is to share the gospel to groups. You could share the gospel yourself with a group. You can get good practice by first learning how to articulate the gospel and also learn how to share your testimony. A good place to start learning to share your own testimony is by first writing it out, and then summarising it further by condensing it to a single page of writing to cover the following elements. Number 1, what was your life like before becoming a Christian? Number 2, how did Jesus Christ change your life? Number 3, how does your life today differ from your life before becoming a Christian? Once you've done this, then become familiar with sharing your testimony and the gospel message by sharing it with a trusted group. See if your church would provide an opportunity for you to share the gospel at one of the church meetings. However, if this step is too scary to imagine, then start with an earlier step. Also consider modern communication avenues. You can engage with the gospel using social utilities like Facebook and Twitter. You can consider broadcasting yourself and your church members, maybe church sermons on YouTube. Maybe develop a personal blog with the gospel, and get ready for the next wave of technology. In the 7 steps, which level do you see yourself? Are you comfortable there? Could you challenge yourself to move one level up? My prayer is that you would start sharing the gospel with as many people as you possibly can. Let me issue here another word of warning. I use such gospel presentations a great deal and find that they can be very effective. However, there is a danger in a packaged approach to the gospel, and here I have to remind you of our teaching on pathos. Let me reiterate. Whenever we present the gospel, we must do so with care and sensitivity, and when possible, a sense of understanding of the position of our hearer. I believe we should all learn some kind of gospel presentation, but this is as much for our own use, so that we can get the message clear in our head as a foundation, as for use as a public tool. Think of it as stocking up your armoury. When you're confident in the gospel message, you'll be able to use it and adapt its telling according to circumstances. When I get into a taxi and the driver engages me in conversation about a terrible disaster that's happened in the world, do I recite to the driver the text of the gospel presentation? No. And yet, as we weave our way through our dialogue, I can hopefully get to a point where I'm naturally showing my hope and belief in the sovereignty, justice and love of my Creator. And in this situation, am I going to push my driver friends to a point of decision for Christ? No, probably not. But hopefully I will have offered something of the light of the gospel, and hopefully for him or her there'll be another time. I really believe that God opens up opportunities for us, and they usually spill out from our everyday encounters. When you live constantly alert to this fact, you find that you're always looking to be one step ahead of a situation, always looking for a way to naturally get into a position where you can share the gospel. The key that I've already stressed is to be real and genuine so that you might earn a listening ear when it comes to presenting the all-important message. When Jesus meets the woman at the well, he opens up the conversation in a natural way. He asks for water. Of course, it doesn't take long before the Lord starts talking about the water of life, but his first approach is through friendly, polite, everyday conversation. Later, when Jesus, just after the resurrection, appears to the two travellers on the road to Emmaus, he opens up a conversation. Luke reports they were kept from recognizing him. What are you discussing together as you walk along? Jesus asks. The Gospel tells of Cleopas' incredulity that the stranger did not appear to know. Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days? Jesus still chooses not to reveal himself, but asks what things. The account goes on with the two friends telling their new companion about the events that Jesus, of course, knew only too well firsthand. Why would Jesus do this? Might it be because he wants to meet them in a spirit of openness? He wants to engage with them, hearing their concerns, listening to their interpretation of the events that are troubling them so much. As an apparent stranger, he wants to show interest in them, to meet them on their level, and allow them the space to reveal something of themselves before making himself known to them, at the right time in a way that is most meaningful.